Welcome to the Live Wildly podcast, a space where we explore how to live our wildest expressions while nourishing our hearts. Here, we cover all things motherhood, spirituality, health, wellness, and more. I'm your host, Olivia Ashley, a mama, intuitive, and seeker of a joyful, inspired life. Let's dare to live wildly. Hello, everyone. This is Olivia Ashley, your host of Live Wildly podcast. And I just want to take a moment to check in because if you are at all feeling like I am, there is some big emotions, big energy, big feelings that you might be moving through. And so I just want to give you the space to take a minute to just settle in. Take a breath. Release and notice any of your worries, any of the anxieties that you're holding, just like it's a cloud above your head, and let it dissipate. Let it break free. Let it just disappear and settle into your body. Take some deep belly breaths. Noticing your heart. How are you feeling today? Are you worried? Are you sad? Are you angry? Maybe you're happy, excited, hopeful. Maybe you're somewhere in between. And I want you to know you are perfect just as you are. That whatever you're feeling and moving through is exactly what you need to be feeling and moving through. And it might be hard, it might be great. But it's your moment and an invitation to remind yourself of your brilliance. Remind yourself that you are larger and more than anything that you are feeling or experiencing. That you are human, that you are worthy, that you are loved. And so wherever that just brought you, take a moment to reflect and don't forget about yourself. Don't forget that purpose of life is for you to explore, for you to feel, for you to integrate, expand, evolutionize yourself, right? And so today, I think it's going to be hopefully supportive that if you looked at the title or just felt the urge to press play, that this is something that you need in this moment, that there's a piece of wisdom here for you or something that's going to bring an aha or a moment of support. Because life is lifing. That's kind of been my quote right now. Life is lifing. And I say that because it removes the baggage, it removes any connotation of, oh my gosh, the busy, the worry, the overwhelm, the chaos, the beauty, the amazingness, the hope, right? It just is life is lifing. Life is lifing. There is a lot of moving parts. And with this recent Virgo full moon that we just had, I am a Virgo rising. My youngest son is a Virgo sun. And I just noticed that there was a lot of vulnerability that was asked of us, that there was a lot of things that said, what is working in your life and what isn't? And I myself personally, if you listen to the last episode especially, have really been moving through this. It feels like this fog, if I can think of Frozen 2, and we're in the locked in misty forest, the enchanted forest, and we're in this realm. And we don't really know what we're doing, but we know there's purpose, that there is something that is here. We are listening, we're feeling, we're understanding it. And we're tapped into that energy and we know something's coming for us. We know there's a change, a new beginning, something on the horizon. And even if you don't resonate with that, there's something in your life that is stirring. I see this cauldron stirring. I see the energy shifting, but we don't know that end result. Just the way when you're in the enchanted forest, you don't get to be relieved and let the mist clear until you kind of gone through this whole journey. And that is what I am deep in. And at first, I thought it was external circumstances. Okay, we're in this beautiful place and we have all these goals and things, and we really do love where we're at. And yet we have this vision, this higher knowing of what we would love it to feel and be like. And that's kind of what I talked about, whether it's land or, what's that next space for me. And that's what was feeling right. And yet it also wasn't. So I've done this really deep reflection, thankfully, with some really amazing friends and with my husband, to just be like, something else is under this surface. And I'll save you the long and the short of it. But it was essentially, it's me. It's me. Something's not right within me. And that's not to say I'm not right. I'm not well, all those things. And yet I am feeling this deep inner pull that is saying it's time to go within again. It's time to look at yourself. It's time to remove the skin. We are in that metamorphosis. We are in that shedding again. And I say again because I'm like, haven't I done this? Haven't we done this? And yet I'm only 31 years old, and it's time. It's time to again go within, to break free of the box that I'm living in, the box that I thought was myself. I am 18 months just about postpartum with my third. And I know you might be like, oh, you're like way past postpartum, but no, postpartum is a journey. It goes on for years. And if you're a mom, you know that there's this epic evolution, epic transformation that happens again and again. Who am I? What am I? How do I exist? What do I want? What are my ambitions? What are my values? And I talk a lot about that because it's so important. That's what I've learned. It's so important to continue having the conversation with yourself, to identify and support yourself around this landscape. And so for me, it's looking like, how do I let go of who I thought I was, or maybe what I'm clinging to, the procrastination, the lack of consistency, the scrolling, the TV, the coffee, those things that I like band-aid myself with because there's this unsettledness underneath. How can I start to let go of those things that are truly not filling me? And I keep hearing the word poison. I keep receiving that. And not that I'm poisoning myself, but it's this like word that's kind of, we all choose every day, right? What we take, what we drink, what we eat, what we consume, what we don't consume, what we buy, how we sleep, when we sleep, all those factors. And for all of us, there are things that could be categorized in that quote unquote poison. And I see that more as like, we are not in moderation. We are not in balance with those things. And so can you check in and actually get really honest with yourself of, I know where I'm lacking. I know what's not right. And now I actually have to make the change or ask for help or start to embody in myself. And I bring it back to just like yourself, because as a mom, as a wife, we take on everyone's stuff, right? We try to band-aid, we try to help, we try to nurture, we do all that. That's not going to go away. And yet we must come back to ourself and say, what the fuck do I want in this life? Who am I here to be? What am I striving for? Who am I at my core right now? Because it changes. It does. And it surprises me how much it changes and how much I do this and think I know myself and think I'm steering my ship the place I want to go. But I'm realizing, do I really want to go that place? Do I really want what I think I want? If that was to show up tomorrow, am I ready? Am I ready to lead and support and do the things I think I want to do? Or am I even really showing up to hold that space, to be a part of that landscape? And am I just manifesting, being like, where's my manifestation? I'm going to put all my juju into this and energy, but then not look at myself. Not look and do the inner work and the inner uncoupling and the inner letting go and where are my boundaries and where can I be a bit more boundless? Because that's where the true work lies. And that's something that comes up in today's conversation and is something that I'm sure is maybe why you press play. And today we have Casey Stevens coming on, who is just this radiant, well-articulated human woman who is really the embodiment of looking at the pain, moving through, finding the purpose, the meaning, and investigating. And she does this brilliant dance of marrying the science with the spirituality that I think we need, that it's helpful. We can look at both lens and look at both sides, because sometimes it's not something spiritual that is really what's unsettling us. Sometimes it's in the physical, sometimes it's in our emotions. And yes, they're all connected, and yet we often can easily overlook to go, I want to just be in the spiritual, or I want to just be in the Western modalities, and not allow for that bridge to take place, that holistic sense to take place. And that's where the power lies. And so I was really, really excited to have her on and for this conversation. After re-listening to it, I'm just like, oof, this is my heart of hearts. Like, she just went deep in the realms that I want to dance in and want to explore more, and articulated things in a really beautiful way, and helped us, I think will help you see how you can identify where you're resisting, where you maybe are having these feelings of unsettledness, what I just kind of talked about with you. And in order to give you some possible entries into uncovering and igniting like your truth and getting vulnerable and working with the field, as she talks about this quantum energy, the field of existence that we are a part of. At our core level, we are atoms, right? We are all just atoms adjusting to the waves and the frequency, and then becoming matter based on the container of what we're really having, those waves and the frequency. And then we become matter and we act out and are a part of this. And so you can always tap into that. And it gives such great insight and truth when we feel so untethered sometimes, when we feel like, I just don't know, my compass is spiraling. The field has clarity. The field has answers that go beyond our mental capacities and or even our emotional capacities, and they bring really grounded truth. That's what I have found in my experience. And so I hope, no matter what your belief system, right, set that aside, be open, just listen. You don't have to take everything, just take what resonates, or, leave the rest, and just explore with this conversation today. And so Casey has over a decade of clinical practice working with thousands of clients worldwide. She's a licensed psychotherapist, a master certified consciousness coach, and a certified clinical hypnotherapist. Beyond that, her intuition and healing abilities allow her to feel clients' unique energy patterns, adapting tools and techniques to support optimal organization for the precise needs of each soul. She offers a unique combination of behavioral sciences, psychoeducation, quantum physics, clinical psychotherapy, intuitive energy practices, ancient medicine techniques, and mystical studies to not only help but guide her clients to true somatic embodied healing. And so that's a bit about Casey's background. She's clinically trained and mystically guided, which again, you can just tell she has all this knowledge and this deep wisdom, and then the experience of, she didn't just go and study, she really went through her own journey and is here to share the wisdom that she's kind of gathered and from her work with clients of what she has seen and what she understands as of now when she balances both of these sides and comes into this beautiful integration. So today we're going to talk about, her story of, moving through painful pieces, being rock bottomed in a way, and having to re-envision her life and re-find herself. We talk about what consciousness is, from that clinical aspect to the field and quantum energy, and how we can work with it, and what that means for us as human. And we go into talking about shadow work, why that's important, what that means, like why is that important to integrate and be aware of. And we just continue to have just this really great conversation about how do we support ourselves? How do we continue to do this deep inner work? And what are those tools and that understanding that we really need to know within these dynamic life that we live? We live these really beautiful, versatile lives. And yet sometimes I think we can feel unsure of where do we get help or where do we start. And it starts within you. And then it's also finding someone who can help you, right? Like that energetic connection and be that mentor, be that person and to find those people in your life to help you continue to reflect upon your life and reflect upon yourself, but do so in a very sacred, supportive way. And that's what Casey brings. So, without much further ado, I'm going to launch you into this episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please share it to any friends, family you think that could really be helped by this conversation. And if you really enjoyed it, I would love if you could please leave a rating and review because that is how we continue to find our people. We continue to grow this community, and it lifts up my heart and my spirits to see the comments from you all and see how this is landing with you. So let's kick you to the episode and let me know what you think. Well, welcome, Casey, to the Live Wildly podcast. I am just really grateful for this connection that we have created and this time and space that we are bringing to bridge this wisdom that I think you have here to share with us today. So I just want to give you a big warm welcome and say thank you for your energy, for your space, and for your wisdom today.
Thanks, Olivia. I'm so grateful to be here with you.
Thank you. So, I always like to start by having you share a bit about yourself, maybe your story, and what you do today.
Sure. So, my name is Casey Stevens, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I have a spiritual psychology practice. So, I work with people kind of blending science and spirit. I just really blend science and spirit, right, in this psychology realm, which means that we can really work in this way to just heal people in a more holistic way, which is what my values are. And I work with people all over the world doing that. So,
Yes, that is what I'm so curious because I think this is where I'd love to see more of. I love that you're blending this side, whereas I feel like sometimes we see you must be one way or the other and you can't quite see both. And so finding those like yourself that use this holistic practice feels really, really important to share. So I think my first question before we dive into kind of deeper is really how did you go on this journey of integrating this mysticism and the science within this field of psychology? And how do you balance these practices in your work? What does that actually look like more than what we can say it and some of us can really understand that, but I'd love for you to expand on that.
mm, yeah, well, I probably took the circuitous path to really integrate those two, which is I kind of went deep into the work myself and started doing my own healing path, right? Where I was spending time with somebody who was also clinically trained, right? And she was a licensed therapist, but she had a lot of her own magic and medicine too. And so this was before I was a therapist. I needed right at that time to really sit with somebody, but I just so happened to find somebody, which I think is no coincidence, who had all of this kind of magical, mystical quality to her as well. Different than my own, but there was just something so healing for me that I really kind of reconnected and remembered inside of myself that I hadn't probably been celebrating as much as I could have. And so, really, the path was then through my own healing, which was, started maybe a few years before I went back to school and decided to do this work where we kind of incorporated both. And I loved that because I can be this real critical thinker and I want to understand things and I want to metabolize things in a practical, logical way. And so that was really vital for me at the time. But I also noticed that like what felt like it took me just that much further, what I really looked forward to about our sessions together, this is me and that therapist, was this mystical quality that she brought. It's like that's what made it really special. Sometimes I know you started our greeting today kind of pulling cards. She had cards in her office, and we would do that kind of thing, or she would just dive in and kind of anything that we were talking about that was really practical she would weave in this really beautiful way of the esoteric and the mystical, right? And so if she saw something or experienced something, she would reflect that to me, and encourage me to kind of tap into myself and access those parts, right? Where I could access, that intuition and that mysticism inside. And so I really was kind of incorporating and integrating it myself. And then, of course, throughout that process, I decided I wanted to do this work too. And of course, I wanted to do it in my own unique way. But I just thought there's so much value that I'm getting from having a healer hold this container for me in this way, that both of these parts are integrated. And I want to figure out how to do that for other people, because if it's this meaningful for me, then it's got to be meaningful for other people. And so then what I did, right, is then I decided to go back to school and incorporated all of those practical, skill sets, right, in the psychology realm. And then I also along the way just incorporated lots of trainings and modalities, studied with mentors, explored and experimented with just this mystical part and some of these more ancient studies and Eastern studies and all of those things that just actually have deeper roots than Western psychology does, right? But I just kind of played around. I sampled with so many different things. I sought out different mentors. And so then, fast forward when I finally started my practice, I was a little reticent to like uh, really kind of let that mystical part be visible. It was always part of me, but I didn't lead with it. I definitely felt more comfortable, like, what is streamline in society and what's going to be accepted. And am I going to, you know, push people away if I'm too much about this mystical stuff. And so I kind of then just kind of opened everything up, and I didn't really talk about that as much, but I would weave it into sessions because I think there is an energetic of that people would just find me and we would work in that way. And so it was kind of slow, right? Because I integrated it into myself, and then I almost had a little bit of a regression in a way when I was in my own practice because I wasn't as open about all of that. And then the more that I practiced, and this didn't take too long, but I've just kind of slowly integrated. And of course, I've been in practice over a decade now. So um, after the first few years, I really started more overtly integrating some of the spirituality into the practice because I just realized, number one, how beneficial it was, like how people could really heal faster when this element was included. And there were many people that I was exercising, right, this part of myself, because I just can't separate who I am as a person and how I show up healing, right? They're one and the same, I really think. There's not really a separation there. And so I found that it was too hard for me to separate those parts of myself. And so I just incorporated, and then I was more, I guess, confident to, let that, flag fly and let everybody really see that this is who I want to work with and this is how I want to work. And if it's not for you, that's okay. But the people that it is for, like, there will just be so much better alignment and synchronicity and frankly growth that can happen in the healing when people really desire this kind of healing. So I had to work through that, but that's sort of the long and the short of that. So I hope I answered all your questions.
No, that was really beautiful. Thank you for expanding on that. And it kind of made me come back to that card that we pulled, which was the death card in the oracle that I was pulling from today, which is that shadow work, that integration. And I love that you have so much experience, right? You didn't go, I'm just going to study and I'm going to learn and then just now I'm going to repeat. You went, I'm moving through things and these things are helping me. Can this help someone else? And allowing that to unfold as that happens, because I think there's just so much beauty in those in this space. We often come from major challenges and we've had a lot of struggle. We've had grief, we've had loss, we've had, full rock bottoms. And yet our evolution then kind of blossom into this beautiful dance of spirituality or connection and energy work. I've seen this time and time again, and then we become to heal. And so I think my next question is just, could you share a little bit more around some of those challenges or what you had to experience in your life? Because I think a lot of beautiful healers like yourself have this deep rooted pain that you moved through and got to that other side. I think that helps us understand, the journey of humanhood, a journey of the hero, right? And this picture, because I think that's just important to share. So if you don't mind, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you've moved through and how you kind of integrated that into your work too.
Yeah, for sure. I call that phenomenon, right? So often we can get stuck in post traumatic stress, right? Which is really kind of getting stuck in the victimhood of anything. And so, what I recognized during this trying time in my life, which I can summarize in a moment, but what I really recognized was a foundational orientation to life that I hadn't quite been challenged to present yet, or I didn't even know about myself. But what I realized is I really leaned into this post traumatic growth, right? I just like challenges were going on, and I really leaned into the opportunity of what was there. And of course, it didn't always feel like that, but my seeking heart really wanted to find answers and to go in deeper into myself and understand what was my part and understand what was it that I was meant to understand, or what the opportunity was in all of the challenge. And so it's such an orientation that I recognize is, again, my value system. And so it's the way then that I realized how valuable that is to help other people heal. And if we have this orientation, which is are people that I want to work with, right, or people that have that similar orientation to life, right, of this post traumatic growth, that hard things are going to happen. And how do we organize ourselves around those problems? And that's really what matters most, because we can't stop hard things from happening. And sometimes they don't make sense. And sometimes, it will seem like there's, why is this happening? And instead of getting stuck in that mode, it's like, how do we organize ourselves around that to really utilize the opportunity that's available to us? So all of that to say, for me, that was I got married early, and I had been with my husband for 12 years. And we started to have some struggles. He started to have some struggles with mental health. And therefore, those became our struggles, right, together. And at that time, right, I mean, there's so much that I learned about that myself, because I had a similar approach to the one I just talked about, maybe not always in the most valuable ways, but so his mental health struggles, I really poured myself into him, and I just thought, okay, well, here's a problem, let's fix it. Like, what do we need to do here? And eventually what I realized was that I really needed to pour a lot of that energy into myself. And so really at that time, this is kind of in my late 20s, I was like having to look at that and not so much focusing on him. I tried that for a long time, but then I thought, okay, well, if this isn't working and I need better tools and I need guidance and I need somebody to hold a container, then I really need to focus on how this is depleting me, and find myself in all of this, because I was really getting depleted and I was getting lost during that time. So the long and the short of that, right, is that I ended up doing a lot of that kind of exploration. And at the same time that he really actually struggled more and atrophied a little bit more in all of those ways. And so our marriage suffered, which eventually ended in a divorce, a separation and a divorce, because we were on such different paths at that time. There what he actually had this opposite orientation, and to no fault of his own, he had this opposite orientation, was that he wasn't at the same time as me trying to work on things, and I was just like ferocious in my effort to do all of those. And for whatever reason, good, bad, or otherwise, he just wasn't in that space at that time. It wasn't available to him. He didn't have that same orientation. So we went our separate ways. And it felt like really that was what needed to happen at that time, because I mean, it's so true what they say about growing together or growing apart. And it was just a pivotal moment that I never would have known or foreseen, but that we ended up really growing apart. And there wasn't any rescuing or saving that I could do, and which of course was devastating, because I really, had gotten married and thought, this is it. This is the person I'm spending the rest of my life with. So you never really foresee yourself. I certainly didn't really even see that was an option. For so long I clung to that, just well, I need to make this work at all cost. And eventually I needed to get even higher, right, in my faith and my spiritual practice, where I didn't need to cling or be so desperately attached to an outcome or to a person or to any of those things, but I really had to see maybe there's a higher guidance that's happening here, and maybe this thing that I think needs to happen, my control over this situation, I need to surrender that, and I need to allow what is happening to unfold. And I need to really listen to the messages of all of that. And so eventually that's what I did, and which is, death and a devastation in so many ways, of an identity, of a life, of a dream, of a marriage, of, all of these parts, right? And so it's really reconciling all of that, and how communities are toward, families are toward. I mean, there's just so much that happens in that really is challenging. And what I also got at that time was this beautiful awareness that, okay, there have been ways that I have been operating, and not really fully exploring or experiencing my own true self, right? A lot of that, especially since we got together so young, a lot of that really, it's like we had grown together, but I had lost some of my own identity, right? Being wrapped up with this person so tightly for so long, that I really hadn't had the opportunity to like explore or experience the growth of myself, before that. And so I really got the opportunity to do that. And again, I alluded to that already, that I was in this process of healing, myself. And instead of focused on, okay, well, it's got to be couples counseling, we got to keep this marriage together, and we got to fix you so that we can be okay, and all of those things, I eventually got to this place where it was like, I have to know myself. I have to understand what's my part. I have to understand, um, why this happened and what I'm meant for, right? And so I just really dug deep doing that, which was a couple of years process. And eventually, again, during that process, I decided I wanted to go back and help people, because again, it was like just everything was kind of it was the tower, right? Where everything crumbled and nothing existed for me anymore. And so it was really even rebuilding, like, yeah, how am I going to operate in this world as a 30-year-old, right? And support myself, and like, what is my purpose, and what is life? And, just all of these kind of existential, things, questions that I was now exploring and examining. And so it was during that process that I went back to school, and again did all of that integration of the spiritual, and that really helped me and really saved me during that time, because it was absolutely devastating, right? I mean, all of it, just it was the hardest process to go through, and to see this person, that I loved, that was struggling, that I couldn't help, but to really surrender that, right? Because it wasn't, there wasn't any vitality in that anymore. And so to really still not want this to happen, but understand that it needed to happen. And so there was this, just processing and reconciliation of that, and, the unfolding and the unpeeling of all of that. And then I went back to school and was in the middle of that process. And then of course, more tragedy happened. And during that time, shortly after our divorce, my husband passed away. And so then that was another tragedy, in a tremendous way, right? And there just were so many layers and levels of loss in that way and in that relationship. And also, I'm kind of committed to this path at this time. And so trying to continue to heal and keep getting more and more lessons of healing, and how that just was meant to unfold, right? How he was this, beautiful teacher for me, that really propelled my healing in a tremendous way. And, just processing all of that and having those experiences, as well as at the same time, right, that I'm trying to learn how to do this in a really kind of clinical, meaningful way. And so that was really kind of my initiation into, this realm of healing and helping others, and how to process all of that, and how to really be with all of these elements of life. And often I will, whether I say it to anybody or not, I'm keenly aware that the experiences I have been through are, by and large, what influences how I show up as a healer, and the ability that I have to access kind of these depths inside myself and this pain inside myself. That, I think, is what really helps me to be a good therapist and healer to other people. I'm always running it through this filter of my own just kind of emotional, mental, spiritual experiences, which I think is frankly one of my best resources that I have.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that can be hard to always move through and remind yourself of, oh, wow, this has really been my journey and what I've gone through. But I don't think any of us escape without it. And so that empathy that you've cultivated is so beautiful. And you can just feel it as you talk of that realization and how can this pain help myself, but also then help others. And so I'm curious, noting that, again, we're all going to face these challenges and hardships and loss. How do you see these lessons supporting our soul and human journey in our lifetime? Like, what's the bigger picture? If you could just kind of look at your clients and yourself, just what would you say to that?
Mm. Well, I believe that we come in as a soul and we choose, we have contracts and we have lessons that we come to this, earth school, this human school to learn. And those are all unique for each one of us. And I believe in other lifetimes, right? I believe that we carry those over from past experiences, our soul, which I believe is eternal and lives on, right? It's this mystical part of us, this ephemeral aspect, right? That never dies, right? That part of us, the energy of who we are, that is unique to each one of us, never dies. And so I believe that when we come into any lifetime, that we carry with us whatever is unprocessed or unhealed from other lifetimes. And I think the human journey that we're given in this particular lifetime is to master some of those lessons. And so I believe wholly that we choose our parents, we choose our family system, we choose our challenges, we choose soulmates, we choose karmic partners who will help us. And really life is just a big exercise and experiment of how we move through those lessons and opportunities to become the version of ourselves that we're meant to graduate with. And so that's my belief, right? And people can have different beliefs about that, but my belief is that nothing is random, right? Like anyone who is in your life, any challenge that's there, any beauty that's there, anything is really meant for you, is meant for you, right? And so it's really, how do I see the meaning in everything? How do I experience and explore the opportunity? And so that's what I meant when I said that so far in this life, my first husband was my greatest teacher. And that doesn't, I mean, there has to be this duality that exists too, because if I hadn't loved him and felt so deeply connected to him, I probably wouldn't have been triggered and challenged by him in the extreme ways that I was. But it is this kind of dichotomous duality, right? That has to exist, that I wouldn't have ever imagined, right? I mean, everything seemed so like it flowed and it was really easy, and we just had this really natural companionship that was really sweet and tender and beautiful, which built a lot of credential and love between us, right? And so then fast forward to when these challenges presented that really felt pretty shocking and felt like they were kind of just out of, like, it was like there was the before and after, right? And so for me, when that happened, it was like, oh, I really, instead of getting locked into the shock and the devastation and the victimhood of any of that, again, I really think it's like, for it was a catalyst for me to grow and become the person that I probably wasn't in alignment to become had I just carried on and we had kept having our life the way we were having it. I had many pleasant experiences, many beautiful growth spurts in my own way, and I really wasn't on the path. I can say clearly I wasn't on the path to become the person that I am now. Had I still been in that marriage, had I not gone through that loss and that devastation and that tragedy, I would not be the person that I am now. And I really believe that it was my soul that was guiding. And frankly, I had to have like these really aggressive lessons that seemed quite aggressive at the time, right? Like I had to have these because I would have just clung. My tendency would just be to have it be easy and to, go along and to be loyal and to keep trucking on, right, in those ways. And so those are aspects of my personality too, that that I wouldn't have pushed beyond had I not been challenged in such a tremendous way. Even, that aspect about the decision to end the marriage, right? I mean, I am also somebody who really considers myself deeply loyal. And it's like I hadn't even conceptualized that I could possibly make that choice. I had to really go through my own healing in order to understand that there was something bigger at play than just this outcome that I needed, right? I need to be married to this person. I needed to understand there and have faith that if every arrow was pointing me in an opposite direction than that, right? And there was resistance on his end, and all the efforting I was making wasn't really received. I had to really understand that there was something larger at picture than I had ever envisioned or I could conceptualize. And it was when I could do that that then I could say, oh, maybe this is better. This is what's in flow. So for some reason, and I don't understand it now, there is a reason that I'm being guided away. And I really think what that lesson was for me was that I was really meant to show up in life in a bigger way. I am a loyal person and I am a caretaker and I am a caring, empathetic person, but I have to utilize that energy where it can be received. And so I think I was meant to go on this path where I could really help and frankly be of value to people that welcomed and wanted that invitation that I and the love and the caring that I had to offer, my healing abilities, right? He couldn't really receive those fully, right? And so it wasn't meant to be all my life wasn't meant to be all poured into this person to rescue them. My life is meant to be poured into people who want to receive that in a way after I had, integrated more knowledge and experience and all of the wisdom, right? Those things. And so I really recognize that that's what I am meant to do. I just kind of had tried to place it in a place that it wasn't clicking in, right? It wasn't valuable there, right? And I wasn't making much of a difference, but yeah, I just had to really explore and experience like, well, what is my soul's path? And my soul really wanted to get to know, I needed to get to know myself and my soul, right? So that I could help people in this more meaningful way. And I just had blocks and barriers to that before. And so through this process, right, I was able to integrate and will be doing for the rest of my life. Like I will always be a student of this, soul's journey, right? That's going to show me really, like if we're not listening to those messages, if we're not leaning in and doing it in a conscious way, then I think some divine intelligence and the divine intelligence in us kind of sync up and then, they will shift us and redirect us and keep attempting to do that because it really wants to incorporate and integrate this aspect of ourself that really wants to master itself and move towards more of that enlightenment in each lifetime that we're given. And so for me, I think that's been what it is. I know that's answering that a lot about me, but that's how I see it working with clients as well. It's like really teaching them to listen to what's underneath that. What is the opportunity? Where is there flow happening in your life? If it's not flowing or resistance is coming up in or around you, how do you listen to those messages and really welcome them, right? So that you can move in this path that your soul really is not going to stop. I mean, like the soul, I think, is so powerful. It is not going to stop trying to get you on the path that it wants you to be on. And so it's really then how do we, as our human selves, work with that in a way that is comprehensive, in a way that is collaborative, right? Like how do we collaborate, learn to collaborate with the soul so that we can get where we're meant to go, so that we can remember the lessons that we're meant to integrate and we can be free from them, frankly. And I see it happening all the time. And that's the work I do with clients, really.
Yeah, that was really helpful, everything you just shared. It's like those big moments are those catalysts in our life that we needed, and not that we were doing anything necessarily wrong. It's not necessarily a reflection of us, but it's okay, at this point, and for this, whatever that higher reason is, this is going to come forward. And then it's up to us to kind of move through and react and trust and find that flow of, okay, this is happening. How do I not resist it? And yes, we want to, but how do we begin to let ourselves dive into that pain, dive into what we're experiencing and go, what is this trying to share? I'm someone, I'm within the same belief structure of you, and really trust that there is meaning. And I might never find that meaning, but I can trust that there is something higher, something there that is directing me. So I think that was a really beautiful way that you described that. And you brought up consciousness somewhat, and that's my next question is you are a consciousness coach, and I really feel like this word gets talked about a lot, but I really would love to hear kind of what is it in your perspective, and what do we need to know about it and its role in finding health and healing and happiness?
Mm. Well, I think of two different kinds of consciousness. There's the lowercase c consciousness and the capital C consciousness. And the work that I do and that process, even that I talked about in my own personal journey, was really from moving from lower C consciousness, which it makes up, as you know, science has discovered, right? Probably 5% of who we are, which means that there are all these programs and our personality, our identity, everything that's habituated lives in the subconscious, right? And there's only 5% of that that we're actually conscious of, which means this is what I'm aware of, right? Which is a pretty limited space, right? And so it's getting to know yourself. It's really even understanding things that you think are your personality. Like, are those really my, like, what is that really who I am? Or are those just strategies that I've adopted and adapted to along the way? And many of those might be maladaptive, by the way. And so it's really that, to me, is what this lower C consciousness is. It's like, well, what do you think you know? What do you think you know? And what you think you know is probably incredibly limited. Oftentimes, when we're really opinionated or we're certain of things, right? Like that comes from that 5%, which, if you think about it, really isn't that much. And so that transformation for me was really integrating more of the capital C consciousness, which is questioning everything about myself, questioning everything about everything around me, right? Once I've questioned it in myself, then I question everything around me, right? In the world and society and culture and my family system and every system, right? So I start to question, and a good example of that belief is just like, oh, well, you know, you get married and you absolutely, like, that is it, right? You know, which was an ideal and a beautiful ideal, and I still, you know, think that that's lovely, and it's limited because it's not really incorporating, right? I had to question and challenge that belief and think, okay, well, is this it for me, right? And really look at, is there something more? Is there something bigger? Even if I still want to be married, by the way, and that wouldn't be my choice to have this dissolve in this way, is, am I being guided that there is something bigger or something more, or maybe, you know, that this is a timeline that I'm meant to share with this person, but it's not meant to be forever, right? It's like that's really challenging your beliefs, right? I mean, our beliefs are a huge, you know, piece of that, right? That makes up all of that. What we think we know is our set of beliefs that we have formed, and so challenging and questioning all of those beliefs leads to this transformation where we can then kind of download more capital C consciousness, which is that what I thought I knew isn't, is very, very limited. And I want to bring more of that material that might be shadow material, might just be unconscious to me from the subconscious. And I want to bring it into my capital C consciousness so that I can know and see myself more clearly, so I can know and see others more clearly, so I can know and see the world more clearly. And so for me, that really is the work that I had to do personally. And again, I will always do it for the rest of my life because there's more material that I can bring over from the subconscious that I can then integrate into my capital C conscious knowing. And that's where I can connect to, like, the more you learn, it's so true, the more you realize how much you don't know. And and it's really integrating that right into this space of not just knowledge, but like what is wisdom and how is it to walk with the knowing being inside of yourself. And so to me, consciousness really, it's understanding. And again, my belief about that is everything is energy. And so it's really understanding that any energy consciousness that I thought that I understood, I have to re-examine and deeply explore and even understand that there's an elements or parts that I still might not know, but I want to sweep it over into this other conscious awareness where now I am awake and I'm curious, right? I'm questioning everything. And I'm also holding space for all far more infinite possibilities to be understood about what I know, which again, I think is, there are so many layers to that, right? And I think that the beginning of that is with going in and understanding that about ourselves so that we can then show up in the world around us and it becomes a new lens through which we see the world and experience the world, and then we can show up and exchange energy, exchange any energy consciousness with anything in a more self-aware, in a more awake, in a more wise way than we could have before. So it's essentially kind of how do we take this 5% and grow that, right? So that more of that 95% that is subliminal, that is subconscious, that is unknown, that is habituated, we make conscious choices about that and we're aware of what it is. And so I want to sweep that, just a greater percentage of my knowing in my life and the way that I approach everything into that space. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that was really helpful. And I think my follow-up question is, how do we do that? So, how do you see what are some of those practices or tools that help you bring forward that energetic understanding and those unconscious pieces to the conscious? And how do we actually ground and work within that space?
Mm. So many ways to do that. My favorite way, I mean, I really believe that we heal when we're witnessed. And so if I needed a container, I needed a sacred, safe space of somebody who could reflect that back to me, who was further along in that journey than I was, right? Who had already done that examination and had knowledge and wisdom about it. I needed the container, which many people have held that container for me at this juncture. Initially, right, it was this beautiful therapist that I was talking about. And then I just kept seeking mentors and healers and people who could reflect that back to me. So I think that's the best way because, again, when something is subconscious, like you don't know what you don't know. And so if you try to examine that and go inward from a place of, again, your limited understanding, it's going to be hard to get very far. So we need somebody who is safe, who can hold that container, who again has already walked that path and perhaps is more advanced than we are, who can reflect back to us what is going on inside, right? Who will invite and create that invitation and welcome us to go deeper into ourselves and challenge. And not just, and this is where I think traditional psychology can be limited. It's like somebody who really can challenge what you think you know, right? Not just somebody who will help you re-imprint the same stories that you've always told yourself, because those narratives sometimes might not be useful to you. They might just re-imprint, right? So if we're just going and doing basic talk therapy with a therapist, we're just reinforcing our beliefs. And not to say all therapy is that way, but I think there can be many limitations around it in that way where we're just re-imprinting more of the same stories, more of the same victimhood, more of the same programs that aren't necessarily vital to us. And so it's having somebody who can really challenge you, that you feel safe and you welcome their challenges, because that's really how we're going to grow. And then they can reflect back to you in a container that you can then discover yourself, and this ability to self-witness. I believe all healing happens with a capacity to self-reflect. And if we can't really self-reflect, which means we can challenge and witness ourselves and welcome in that challenge that, hey, maybe I don't know everything that I think I know. Maybe there are some limitations in me. Maybe, the way that I'm thinking about this is wrong, right? Maybe somebody has more wisdom or more insight about that and they could reflect that. And so I think the best way to start it, right, number one is just the decision, the desire, right? So that's always kind of the starting point, right? But then it's finding, when you are seeking a healer or a container holder or somebody who can, a therapist or whatever you choose, I think it matters less what their training is. and more, how do you feel in their presence? Like, who do you really feel, like you can open up and soften, but they can also challenge you, right? I mean, I like approaching things, and that's what I loved about my therapist. I think that I approach people in this similar way, that we need kind of this balance of kind of structure and warmth, right? We need somebody that we can feel really safe to be incredibly vulnerable and authentic with. And we need somebody who's going to push and challenge us to grow, who's not just going to agree with us or tell us what we want to hear to make us feel good. So it needs to be that balance. And then I would just say it's an energetic and totally, which is totally intuitive and unique to each of us, right? I'm not going to be for everybody. Not every healer will be, but it's really listening that the most therapeutic and healing element is going to be how you feel in that person's presence and can you grow with them. And so just listening intuitively to that and noticing, yeah, who do I feel expanded when I'm in their presence? Whose energy and their healing, right? Because when we choose a healer as well, and I'm probably going on a bit of a tangent as I'm explaining this, but I think it's such a big part of it, is when we select a healer, we are absorbing their energy consciousness. If we do this work really well, our energy consciousness and theirs are blending. And so to choose somebody who really is embodied, right, in their practices, is embodied in their own healing, is integrated, because if we don't, then we're absorbing their consciousness. And so it's being really aware. And so I know for me, like when I started with that process, I was just so curious and hungry that I would, try lots of things and lots of people. And at this juncture in my healing, and I'll always have space holders for me for the rest of my life, even though I do this work, right? I'll always have people who I seek out who can hold that container for me. I'm much more discerning about who I let hold space for me, because also I've evolved a lot, right? So people who can hold that space for me are just of a different quality. Their energetics are just very pure. And so I think noticing that, because ultimately when we choose somebody to hold space for us, we're leveraging their energy consciousness, we're leveraging their wisdom, we're leveraging their level of healing. And so it's really important. But I think that's the way that we really do it, is find somebody who, and it could be, I mean, I think it's beautiful when we can have one-on-one time and really be held in a container that way, where it's individuated and it's, yeah, just an intimate connection. I know for me, a lot of that intimacy is a huge reason and a parallel process in which we heal. But there's ways that you can do, like choose your mentors. If you're watching YouTube or listening to podcasts, like there are so many free ways to do that as well. But be aware of what you feel and what energy you're leveraging from the people that you are allowing to infiltrate, right, your space and this intimate realm of healing. So I hope that answers that question.
Yes, that
Mhm.
made a lot of sense. And I think it's really important, that discernment, to always come back to and make sure that we are really checking in, and we get to set those boundaries and we get to make those decisions. And yet when we are in that space of like complete rock bottom or just stuck, that can be kind of hard. So just trusting yourself and finding those first people that can come through. And it brings me to also, so we're talking about energetics and consciousness. Really want to talk about the quantum field a little bit. I work with it when I'm doing Akashic record readings or getting intuitive guidance for myself. I understand it on that aspect. And I'm starting to learn more about how that can really support healing. Like so much happens in the quantum field, but I'm curious, what role do you see it playing in healing and manifestation as you understand it?
Well, it's everything, right? I mean, it's like everything, and which is so beautiful, because again, my belief is everything is energy. And so what that means is that I am an energy consciousness made up of so many different energy consciousness. And of course, I want to purify those, right? But it's also understanding that everything else, even animate objects, like it's understanding that we live in an animate world. And so it's really knowing then that everything has a consciousness to it. And I mean, you could look in the space, right? It's like, well, what consciousness do I feel from any object? But then you think about that throughout the world and different relationships, and it's so big and vast that I could never even, like, our brains can't even conceptualize how big that is. But to me, that's the field, right? And if everything is energy, even if we come down to this dense matter, like our human lives are this density, right? But then there are objects that are dense. density. And it's really understanding, again, that energy consciousness of all of that. And then how does my consciousness, my energy consciousness, blend with the energy consciousness of anything or anyone or any time or any space, right? Again, what I think happens in the field is time is an illusion, right? There is no time and space. We can go back and we can heal things from other lifetimes, from childhood, from the future. We can work with this, and we are working with it all the time. It's just how consciously are we colluding with this energy. And so everything that's showing up in your life is a reflection of your soul and your level of healing at all times, no exception in my belief, right? And so it's really, how do I consciously collaborate with that energy, which is, we would call manifestation. How do I consciously collaborate with that? And if there's anything in my life that I don't like, or I'm struggling with, or I'm suffering, how is it that the external world is just reflecting back to you what's unhealed inside of you? And so being with that really, and accepting and understanding that. And then if you don't like it, again, if you have somebody who can hold a space for you, or if you do it on your own, if you know how to do that, right? It's really understanding that the quantum field really is a field of energy. It's a divine intelligence, right? That is, again, far more vast and comprehensive than I could ever explain scientifically. And I know it's true, right? So I can travel up into the field, and our emotions, our thoughts, right? We can travel into the field and draw back to us, right? It's often kind of this concept of particle and wave. And so there is this density of the particle and the human form, but how do we move into the wave, which is the energy wave of the field that is at all places at all times, right? And draw back to us what we want from that wave, right? And integrate that back into the particle, which is our human life and our human experience, right? Everything that we see reflected around us. And so it's so amazing, because especially a lot of the work that I do with people is shamanic of nature. It is subconscious, right? Where we are accessing my favorite work. Certainly I do a lot of this consciousness where it's just like psychoeducation and educating people about the consciousness and concepts of all of these things. But then the deeper work that I love the most is when we can go into, say, a meditation, or you get into a more subliminal state, and then we're accessing through all time and space everything that might need to be healed. And sometimes, again, those things are invisible. We have no idea, why is this showing up in my life? A good example of that for myself even is, sometimes we can look at just the basic psychology and family system and think, well, gosh, if I had all these relational problems, say in my marriage and whatnot, well, I must have learned that or absorbed that from somewhere. And what's interesting is, in my case, it wasn't. What I've learned about my own experience is I had real, like, karmic contracts in this life to learn about relationships, romantic relationships especially, and relationships in general. But I didn't absorb that from my family system, right? My parents have this beautiful marriage, right? Like, idyllic, right? To really admire. I didn't see that around me and my family. Like, I just didn't. So it wasn't something that psychology could point to and say, well, this is why you're playing this out, right? For me, what I learned in my own unique experience is it was actually more of it. Not to say there weren't elements that, right, I absorbed, right, from that system. But if I look at it, it's like, and what I've learned in my own kind of subconscious journeys and shamanic kind of traveling and all of that is like, oh, I've carried this from other lifetimes where I really had a lot of karma to resolve around romantic relationships. And it's really been my greatest lesson in this life, is healing that. But the place that I can point to is really kind of traveling, in the field back into places where I could understand, why the hell is this happening to me, right? Like, what's going on? Why does it seem like I'm struggling so much with this? Because I really can't point to anything in my family system, my family of origin, circumstances around me to say why this is happening. Like, there isn't a direct correlation. And when there's not, sometimes we have to go deeper and find what's going on. And so if there's a lesson that you're meant to learn in this life, it's really going to the root and having more understanding. And I know I'm somebody that operates, that really wants to understand that. I want to understand it, right? And I don't want to get too lost in the intellectualization of that, so that I can move forward and transform it and actually get the lesson. So to me, that's a great example of, like, how do you use the field to go back and heal those things so that frankly I don't have to keep learning those lessons, because believe it or not, I didn't learn those lessons right away even after, the loss of my marriage, right? I continued to have struggles in that way in romantic relationship for a long time. And so I had to keep incorporating that. But again, like when we go deeper and we can connect to the field, again, it collapses all time and space because we can be anywhere at any time and connect to any part of ourselves to integrate and heal that. And so that's a lot of the work that I do, right? But it's really kind of understanding. And sometimes it's hard just to say it, right? I mean, you need to experience it to really trust it. And that's really how I work with people as well, is I want them to not just take my word for it. I'm not here to give you a reading or to tell you what needs to be healed, right? Because you won't trust it as much if you can't experience it yourself and really walk away with the deep knowing that even if I can't explain this, right, I just know it's true.
Hmm. Oh, that's so helpful. That was such a beautiful explanation that you just took us on. And so it brings me to thinking for those who maybe have not experienced the field or just working with their intuition, but they are maybe struggling with, well, what is it really saying? And, am I actually listening? How do you help support women and even mothers to begin to really experience their own inner wisdom and that in that experience, yes, that curiosity of let's remove kind of this worry or any of these blocks and just kind of drop in and start to feel the sensation, start to get a sense of what's coming up to help us navigate challenges, navigate the lives that we're living. Where would you recommend people start?
Well, I would say we have all experienced the field. We are all experiencing the field all the time, but you may not be doing it consciously. And so, if you're feeling like you're a victim of anything, like if you're struggling, if you're noticing that there are real hardships in your life, then you might not be consciously connecting to the field, but you are connected to the field. Like you can't get out of it. So it's really then what I would say is start to observe the patterns. And if you have a hard time doing that, and so what are the patterns? What are struggles that show up in your life that repeat themselves? And it feels like, man, I've just had this feeling before. Oh, why does this always happen? Or this is so hard. It's like notice the stories you tell yourself about the patterns of things that recycle. And those probably are your lessons that you're meant to be here in this life to overcome. And if you have a hard time separating yourself enough, then again, find somebody who can hold the container for you. But start to be curious about the challenges, the struggles, right? Like I know I was guilty of this for a long time, right? All the things that were going really well, it was easy just to focus on those and live into that life, which is great. And it might be kind of idyllic in a way, but it's a bit of like a spiritual bypass, right? And that's what, before I became conscious, it was like, yeah, actually everything seemed fine until it didn't. And then I realized all the things that weren't fine that were under the surface. And so start to observe the patterns of what recycles and repeats itself again and again. And if you get clear of that and you're still not able to do that, then find somebody who can hold a container for you. And what I mean by container is just a sacred space, a healing circle where, again, you can feel safe to be witnessed, but challenged and vulnerable and all of those things. To me, seek somebody who can do, even if it's a friend, even if it's, somebody, although sometimes there's not the like having the objectivity is really valuable, right? To have with a healer that's in a professional setting, right? I think that there's a lot of utility in that. But of course, people have to choose, what access they have. And I would say starting by noticing where the challenges are. Those are your lessons. Those are the contracts that you've come here to overcome that your soul wants you to overcome. And so there will always be patterning around that. And again, that even on the basic psychology level, like what are the dynamics that you notice you're struggling with, right? Like what has happened again and again? Where do you notice that you really struggle? So this can be esoteric and spiritual, it can be mystical, or it can be really practical. Man, I'm always in a relationship with a narcissist. Man, I'm always the one that's broken up with. Man, I'm always have people that criticize me. Oh man, I always whatever patterns or dynamics are prominent in your life, look to those and then get really curious about them. And then really ask like how like do these things cause, disruption to my life, to the flow of my life? Is it impeding me from having an even more, grand, enlightened, fulfilled experience? And if it is, then there's probably some work to do on those things. And so, in that way, then again, how do you start to question? How do you use what you can learn and know once you start questioning those things to expand to a more transformational experience that would be more embodied, more enlightened, more fulfilling for you?
Yes, and that brings me to shadow work because I think this is kind of where we started. So I want to touch on this a little bit. Is that how you would describe almost like that is our shadow in a sense? Some of those things, like we're getting these lessons, we're getting these repeating things. And so it's asking us to kind of dive into that uncomfortability, into those. I see it as like the mud underneath the flower that's really trying to bloom, but it's like the soil isn't quite well enough for us. I'm just curious if we could touch about shadow. Like, why is that important and how you recommend people starting to make friends with it? Because, same, it's like I had a similar journey of, oh, it's all love and light, and you start to feel good. And then it's like, well, no, I have
Mhm.
all this deep things that need some attention and some love and some inner child wounding that I want to come forward. So, how do we find that balance and also kind of invite that? Shadow's good. Like it's good to see that side and also have that balance and that duality. Yes, if you could just share some about that.
Well, I mean, you're right on about that. Our shadow selves, like what we do with our shadow self, which are essentially all of the parts of ourselves that we judge. And it could be, and if we're not even keen of what we're judging in ourselves, often you'll know because you're judging it in other people. It's what irritates you, what triggers you, what you don't like. And again, some of us turn that inward and some of us turn it outward, in a more overt way. And so it's noticing what is it that you're criticizing or judging or blaming or shaming in your life? What is it that you don't like and you really don't have a tolerance for? And if you haven't consciously explored that, then and welcomed it and really sat with it, because that is when I talk about the whole self. And that's really I think where we our soul is trying to go, by the way, if I didn't conceptualize it in that way. It's like our soul wants to achieve wholeness, and to me wholeness is the integration of all of this shadow material. And so anything that we are judging or blaming or shaming or criticizing, or we have no tolerance for, we notice that we're triggered by other people, we're uncomfortable with inside of ourselves, that is what we really need to sit with and invite to be comfortable. Because again, if we're just celebrating all the fabulous, beautiful parts, we're really actually pretty separate from ourselves still. We're separate from that wholeness. And so I think we want to eliminate the separation that we have and close that gap, and really sit with, well, if there's something that's triggering me in somebody else or in myself, if there's something that I'm hating inside myself, if there's some part of me that I can't incorporate. An example of that for me was visibility, right? Like it was really, I was so uncomfortable being visible, just as a example. And so that's why it's great for me to do stuff like this, where I come and I talk about my story, right? And anyone can hear it, right? And I can't take it back. And it's really important to put myself out there. There's a healing element for myself that's always happening, but in a way that I can really, be more authentic and be more transparent, and allow what is scary or what I might fear would be judged by others or would be imperfect to others, right? I need to lean into, how can I really show up in a way? Can I talk about this in a way? Can I share myself without editing that because I have fears around that? And so that is shadow work, right? And leaning in a conscious way where you take the conscious right action to do that. This is an example of it. But there was a long time I couldn't do that, right? I would be too afraid. Oh, well, what will people think? Or they're going to blame me, or they're going to think I'm a bad person, or, whatever that is. And so making that visible, right, is moving through the shadow, and it's saying, hey, I'm all of these. I had all of these experiences. I'm comfortable, whatever you want to say. I know the truth, right? Whatever. And I don't mean you, but you know what I mean. It's like anything that I could imagine being criticized or judged or ridiculed for, I just have to be with that and accept it and understand that I know the truth in all of that. But where I limit myself is where I can't integrate that shadow material, right? Where I'm still trying to control or block other people judging, or the parts of myself that I might have judged, right? So it's really sitting with it. It's really the key to all of this. Like, we can't be whole if we don't incorporate all of that shadow matter and welcome it, and then decide consciously what parts of our life we live into, which to me, I believe are made up of our value system. And I want to consciously choose my value system, which is a really important aspect of who we are. I think that's almost like our virtues and our values from a conscious place are really the blueprint of our soul. And so how do we live in alignment with that? And the soul again wants to integrate all of those parts. And so whatever it is that we would just notice again, where are you shaming or judging in yourself or in others? And there's probably shadow work to do to incorporate that. And yeah, I mean that it's so vital. It's essential that we do it and we incorporate all of those parts, or else we can't really be whole, right? We're just spiritually bypassing. We're too love and light. We're not integrating the most key parts. And what will happen if we do that is you might be able to get by doing that for a long enough period of time, but eventually it will emerge. Something will trigger you enough, some circumstance in life, your soul will guide you to experiences that are going to trigger you and are going to show you what shadow material is in there. And so I would want to be as prepared as I possibly could around that shadow matter, rather than having it catch me off guard, which is what it did do at the time, right? Like,
Mhm.
because I wasn't really integrating. I was really kind of living this blissful, idyllic life, or so I thought, but I wasn't integrated at all. And so I needed to do the work to incorporate all of those shadow parts. And I'm grateful that I had to do it, although it was really, really hard.
Yes, making friends with our fear and also identifying values. I talk about that a lot because that was so core to me getting clear on like, well, who am I? What do I really value? What do I really want to make forward in this life? Because we're inundated with all these external things of what we should believe, what we should think, what we should strive for.
Mm.
And it was like unpacking that. And I think that's been some of my shadow work is just unpacking those expectations, those beliefs, and those fears. What are those fears and what's real and what's not? Like it's a lot of this is just kind of made up in our mind. And so that was a really helpful, grounded explanation. And on this theme, I'm curious, what's one thing you wish people could understand that often stands in their way of their own healing? Is that shadow? Is that, the unconscious? Just what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's like notice where you're resisting, right? Notice where your ego, and there's value in everyone has an ego and there's value in that. But again, that's what we think we know. That's where we come from a more arrogant place that ultimately is actually limiting us. And so resistance will come from that, fear will come from that. Yeah, just our ego and will block that from happening. And so really notice how our ego and any compensatory strategies or coping mechanisms that we could use to protect us and to keep us kind of locked into the way that we've been operating or what we think we know will limit us. And so we have to be willing to surrender all of that to really examine, again, to self witness, to self reflect, to challenge those things. And then not listening, I would say, would be the second one. It's like, if you are getting feedback that flow is not happening, resistance is happening in or around you, and then you're not honoring what you learn. And I've certainly been guilty of that myself as well at times. How do you recognize that that's happening? And the energy wants to flow, your soul wants to flow. And so if resistance is coming up, I would just say pause and notice, why is this hard right now? Like, what could the barrier be? Could it be inside of me? Could it be some more divine guidance, right? That's trying to redirect me. And I am forcing my will and trying to control this situation, and I don't know what is best for me. I may not know that, right, if I haven't consciously explored it. So I would say those are some of the biggest, and there can be, all kinds of limiting beliefs. Again, examining our beliefs is huge and is tied into all of that, of course. But it's what we think we know. So what do you believe in, being willing to really challenge that? And if you're locked into beliefs, and you really have to explore those limiting beliefs and understand how they might be impairing you from having the very life that you want, and how holding on to beliefs that aren't serving you is going to create your suffering. And so I mean, there's no prize for suffering. I always say that, right? Like there is no prize for
Mhm.
suffering. But what would it be like? I know for me, what I have learned is one of my highest values is liberation, is feeling free from that. And so, how is that diametrically opposed to control, right? Like it is the opposite of that. So when I am trying to force or grip or control or being too attached to anything, I'm not able to experience this sensation of freedom and liberation that I think my soul in particular really wants to feel. But I think many of ours do. So
Yes, that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing on that. And my last question to you before I move into the wild heart questions to close would be, as I was reflecting on just, the energy we're stepping into this year is really fiery, kind of intense. A lot of us are moving through some shadow work, some old things we thought we got through. And I'm curious because I think the collective has a lot of themes or that we can kind of integrate into our own lives. And so I wanted to ask, what are some common themes or a theme that you've seen in clients recently that are coming up in the collective to be worked on? I'm just wanting to just kind of get a grasp and a temperature check of, what are most of us feeling? And then kind of maybe what you see as that root that's really kind of wanting to be seen as well.
yeah, good question. Honestly, I see so many themes. I think we are all so unique that it really is, how does it express in your life? What is the lesson your soul? But for sure, it feels like it's been an intense time with the astrology and, you know, all of those things, which I don't pretend to be an expert in, and yet you can feel it, right? You can feel like this week, actually, to me, even, right? I notice it around me and the clients that I'm working, but I've noticed it in myself. It's like, whoa, this week has been super intense energetically. And it just feels like, kind of things are heavier, and there are things coming up to the surface again and again. And I mean, that's really part of the healing path too, is this really noticing how sometimes we can feel like we've healed something, but then there will be another flare or another kind of challenge or another test around that will just keep cycling through. And I think it's really our ability to move through that as quickly. So many themes, right, that I see, but I think it's really like, what is the contract that you brought in, and how this feels like a really potent time that we are being moved. And it's so much more normalized too. Like people understand it in these spiritual terms better than they did a decade ago, right? When I felt like, oh, I can't really show everybody what's going on, right? But it's really just listening to how that shows up for you in your own personal life. So I would say whatever those themes are, I mean, think about the things that humans care about, right? Could it be money? Could it be relationships? To me, it feels like there's a lot of relationship stuff going on. If am specific about anything, it feels like there's a lot of that relational framework that is coming up in general that I see. But again, like everyone is unique. And so whatever you notice is really prominent, or it feels like it's inflammatory or flaring in your life, notice that, and don't think it's a failure, and don't think, oh, well, you didn't do the work, and don't get so lost in even the victimhood of that. Although, like, we have to adjust. To me, I noticed this week, I felt it myself, like really physically, like there was just like a density, and man, it felt like I just was like blasted with all of this energy in my physical body that I could feel. But I noticed that it came up in like some of the fears that I had around well-being of not even myself, but this is an old dynamic specifically for me. So, which I only give the examples to have people be able to illustrate how that might show up in their life. But in my partner has actually had a lot of health stuff. And so what I noticed with my history and my husband before is that really activates a fear in me that is like has to sit with that, and how then that filters through my system is, for me it will really hit me physically pretty deeply. So there's something going on where I'll get in fear because of course, like, oh, I just desperately want him to be well and okay and to feel good and not to struggle. And I'll notice how I can kind of get into this like catastrophe thinking, or wanting to, wrap him in bubble wrap and make sure he's okay, or over caring, or all of those things, which it's like I've healed through a lot of that and even been through that with him before. But there's something in that that's been activated in me that's an old wound. And so it doesn't really go away. We just get more and more opportunities to master it and to see, well, how do you do with this time? Right. And it's not always easy, right? Because it will feel like I can literally physically feel all of that coming through my own body. So that's not to say that that's what it's been for everybody, but again, look in your own unique life. And if something's hitting you or blasting you or feels like, oh, it's so hard right now, or it's so scary right now, or I have all these fears, notice how there's probably a theme in that, because energetically in the collective, in the field, it feels like there's an intensity of that that's kind of blasted down almost. Yeah, like solar flares almost that are hitting us and activating those parts. And so don't dive all into the fear of it, right? And I have even had my own tendency even this week, and I again help people do this, where I can feel that and get into the worry and get into the, okay, well, let me micromanage this, and really surrender. And like the best thing that can get me out of that are really my spiritual practices. And so that's what I would say. I hope that helps.
Yes, what I want to just reiterate, because what stuck out with me was the reminder that healing is a process and it's a journey. And a lot of things that were like, wait, we healed that, right? It healed, it's done. Why is this coming up again? And realizing, you said it so well, being friends with that, you noticing that, oh, I've been here before and this is coming again. So there's still more, and there probably will still be more, and that's okay. And so reminding ourselves that this isn't a journey just to say, I'm going to get my sessions and I'm going to work through this and then I'm all good. I think what really stood out to me was just that reminder that it's okay to be moving through things that you're like, oh, wait, this is here again. Because yes, it's here again. This is probably a big soul lesson, big soul journey. And that's what it feels like collectively we're moving through. I just see us like wrapping a present. Like we're kind of trying to find those pieces, remove the ripped paper and kind of patch it again, noting like it will probably need that again in time. So thank you. That was just really helpful. And so to move us into the Wild Heart questions, I always ask my guests, being on the Live Wildly podcast, which live wildly really means living authentically in your heart. So whatever that looks like for you, I want to ask, how do you currently live wildly?
Well, I think, it is being in flow, like being authentic. Like I mentioned, kind of the visibility, which is really, again, on a spectrum to me, that is trying to eliminate the smallness that I have lived with, right? So it's again doing things like this, sharing, being more authentic, right? I mean, to me that is so huge, and being true to yourself and not being afraid who that offends, or if anybody likes it or if they don't, but really doing it for you. And everyone around you can't not benefit, right? If you are authentic. As so I love even the name of your show and your intention, right? And the energy consciousness that's kind of like imbued in that. It's so important. I think just like this another thing about the soul that I think is so important is it really is this path. Like the soul comes in authentic, it takes on all this conditioning, and then it's meant to go back to its pure authenticity, right? So it's this journey that it wants to take. And so I feel like that's the journey that I'm really living into more, rather than being, distant or more clinical about things. It's like, how can I be more vulnerable and more authentic, and listen to more and more of that flow of myself? And it's healing for me the more I lean into those things. And so that's what I would say.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that again. And I'm curious, who or what inspires you right now?
Mm. I think just even that, like anyone who shows up with the desire to be authentic, anyone who is living, like, when you are in the presence of somebody who is authentic, you feel it in your bones and it feels good. So I don't care who you are, if you are showing up in that space in that way, to me, that is beauty, right? That is what life is all about. And so I think I would just say that it doesn't matter if it's somebody beginning their journey that's a new client, or somebody that I could, come upon, anywhere in the wild world, right? That I may not know, but I might have a moment to observe them. I think anybody who lives authentically and aligned, to me, that is integrity, right? To me, that is integrity with our values. It is this impeccable way that we carry ourselves, and not in a pretentious or poised way. It's wild, right? I mean, it is exactly that. And so I really admire that, and I want to feel that, right? I want to experience that. There's just joy and levity in that.
Yes. Oh, I love that. There's a lot of just, I love that word integrity, that strength, that respect for yourself and the authenticity to show up and just live your truth. Like that's where we should all be. And so I love that. And I can tell that that's right at your heart space. And I'm curious, what is an intention of yours for 2024?
I would say, I mean, it might sound like I'm repeating myself, but to do more of that, right? Like just to lean into that, and any part of myself that can have this tendency to be small or to put others first, right? In maybe a bit of a self-abandoning way. It's like, how do I really lean into that? How do I become more authentic, more vulnerable? How do I become more integrated? How do I let go of that smallness and not worry, about that in any way, but let myself really expand to the space that I'm meant to, and let it touch the people that it's meant to touch. And I think that's really my intention, right? I don't know how exactly that will unfold or what will happen, but yeah, I think just really living in that way, having the freedom, right, not to limit myself in any way. And so my intention is just to remove even more of those limitations. And again, it's such a big thing, but just live authentically and in flow and listening to that intuition.
Oh, that was so lovely. Well, thank you, Casey. I'm so appreciative of your time, of your wisdom, of the space that you came to just be here with me, be here with our listeners today. And I feel like this was just jam-packed with a lot of integratable, grounded information as we all live our best lives, search for healing, and continue on this wild, wild journey that we are all living. And so, why don't you just end us with letting people know how they can reach out, get in touch with you, and where they can find you?
Oh, sure. So, my name is Casey Stevens, and my practice is called Shrink Bigger. So, you can find my website, which is www.shrinkbigger.com. And there's lots of free little things and newsletters, and I send out things like this podcast that I'm on, and freebies that people can just sample and see how the energy feels. And of course, I'm on Instagram at Shrink Bigger. And so you can find me there. And I do work with people all over the world. So if it ever felt aligned for anybody, then they'd be more than welcome to reach out. Usually there's a knowing in that. So I love and I trust that.
Yes. Well, thank you, Casey, again for your time in this space. It was such a pleasure to connect today.
Likewise. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you.